3.6 U.S. History Test, Cold War, Civil Rights, Vietnam. Number 1. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of his dream that the United States would reach a time when all God's children, black men and white men, will be able to join hands. This speech expressed his desire to A. Unite all church into one religion, B. Establish religious freedom for Americans, C. Replace racial segregation with an integrated society, D. Create a separate nation for African Americans within the United States. Number 2. Movements led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Cesar Chavez were similar in that both A. supported attempts to overthrow the established government, B. used nonviolent protests to bring about social change, C. boycotted agricultural crops, D. were elected to national political office. Number 3. In the late 1800s, the Supreme Court's decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, A. established a legal remedy for victims of discrimination, B. created a legal justification for segregation laws, C. affirmed the legality of federal regulation of state elections, D. recognized public protest as a legal form of civil disobedience. Number 4. Which book played a role in changing attitudes about traditional gender roles in American society? A. Common Sense by Thomas Paine, B. The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, C. How the Other Half Lives by Jacob Riis, D. The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. Number 5. During the early 1900s, Booker T. Washington supported a moderate strategy for attaining civil rights for African Americans, while W.E.B. Du Bois called for a more aggressive approach. During the 1960s, a similar difference emerged between A. Medgar Evers and Thurgood Marshall, B. Barbara Jordan and Alice Walker, C. Rosa Parks and Marcus Garvey, D. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Number 6. How did the methods advocated by the Black Panthers to achieve their goals differ from those of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? A. They formed a third political party. B. They were passionately anti-communist. C. They restricted their actions to the use of passive resistance. D. They considered the use of violence to protect their own communities. Number 7. Which government action was intended to ensure that African Americans could exercise their 15th Amendment rights? A. The Supreme Court decision in Sweatt v. Painter. B. The executive order to desegregate the U.S. Army. C. The passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. D. The Supreme Court decision in Plessy v. Ferguson. Number 8. It is hereby declared to be the policy of the President that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services, without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. This policy shall be put into effect as rapidly as possible, having due regard to the time required to effectuate any necessary changes without impairing efficiency or morale. Executive Order 9981, issued July 26, 1948. This executive order was issued by A. President Harry Truman, B. President Dwight Eisenhower, C. President John F. Kennedy, D. President Lyndon Johnson. Number 9. In this photograph from 1963, Governor George Wallace's A, refusing to allow 9 African American children to attend Little Rock High School. B, refusing to permit African Americans to eat in his restaurant. C, ordered by federal officials to admit African Americans to the University of Alabama. D, being threatened by local white activists for his support of the civil rights movement. Number 10, the main means by which the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC, sought to increase minority participation in the democratic process was by A, organizing large marches, rallies, and other peaceful protests. B, bringing lawsuits against government leaders in federal courts. C, seeking to add a voting rights amendment to the Constitution. D, lobbying members of Congress to pass a Voting Rights Act. Number 11, which method of achieving civil rights did Rosa Parks use when she refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955? A, lobbying. B, litigation. C, amending the U.S. Constitution. D, civil disobedience. In these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he is denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity, where the state has undertaken to provide it, is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. Chief Justice Earl Warren, 1954. Which action occurred as a result of the Supreme Court decision excerpted above? A, the requirement of equal access to school facilities for disabled students. B, the expansion of science in school curricula. C, the implementation of requirements for federal certification of private school teachers. D, the desegregation of public schools. Number 13. Which civil rights leader also became the first African American to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court? A, W.E.B. Du Bois. B, Martin Luther King Jr. C, Thurgood Marshall. D, Rosa Parks. Number 14. How did the Brown v. Board of Education decision influence the civil rights movement? A, by discouraging activists from relying on the judicial system. B, by guaranteeing scholarships to minority college students. C, by providing a judicial basis for achieving equality in other areas. D, by eliminating social barriers associated with hiring practices. Number 15. The 1972 poster to the right depicts an organization originally formed to advocate A, publicly funded health care for children. B, better economic treatment of migrant workers. C, a retirement system for farm laborers. D, equal employment opportunities for women. Number 16. Cesar Chavez, Hector Garcia, and Betty Friedan were similar in that they all A, were members of the Black Panther movement. B, were leaders in the fight for civil rights and equal opportunity. C, opposed the nonviolent approach to obtaining civil rights. D, had as their main goal the achievement of greater opportunities for women. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and to do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and others too. President John F. Kennedy speech at Rice University on September 12, 1962. The main purpose of this speech was to win public support for A. Establishing a missile defense system on the moon, B. Cooperating with communist countries and exploring space, C. Surpassing the Soviet Union in the space race, D. Controlling the spread of nuclear weapons. Number 18. President Kennedy of the United States and Premier Khrushchev of the Soviet Union averted a potential nuclear war in the Cuban Missile Crisis by A. Compromising on the removal of nuclear weapons in both Cuba and Turkey, B. Agreeing to a nuclear arms reduction treaty, C. Agreeing to a Freedom of the Seas treaty, D. Compromising the status of Cuba as a neutral nation in the Cold War conflict. Number 19. President John F. Kennedy supported the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba as an effort to A. Remove a communist dictator from power, B. Stop the flow of illegal drugs to the United States, C. Support Fidel Castro's effort for reform, D. Rescue American hostages held by Cuban freedom fighters. Number 20. What phrase best completes this diagram? A. The credibility gap, B. The domino theory, C. Factors leading to the Vietnam War, D. Responses to the Vietnam War. There's a question mark in the middle. The anti-war movement, silent majority, Americans distrust government leaders, and demand for 26th Amendment permitting 18-year-olds to vote. Number 21. 4 Kent State University students killed by Ohio National Guardsmen. The event described in this headline resulted in A. Decreased federal funding for student loans, B. Increased support for the anti-war movement, C. The reinstatement of the draft, D. An end to federal investigations of student organizations. Number 22. Which of the following was a result of the Vietnam War? A. South Vietnam was able to maintain its non-communist status. B. The United States failed to contain communism in Southeast Asia. C. Richard Nixon was forced to resign the presidency. D. The Wars Powers Act was repealed by Congress. Number 23, the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and Cambodia. President Richard Nixon ordered attacks and bombings into Cambodia and Laos, which were very controversial. Based upon this map and your knowledge of the trail, why, in President Nixon's view, were these attacks necessary? A. The Viet Cong were based in Laos and Cambodia. B. The North Vietnamese Army was based in Cambodia. C. Cambodia and Laos were used as supply and troop movement lines. D. The United States needed to control Cambodia and Laos to prepare for an invasion of North Vietnam. Number 24. At what point did the majority of Americans begin to question the ability of the United States to win the Vietnam War? A. After LBJ began bombing North Vietnam in 1964. B. In 1973, as Nixon completed the withdrawal of all American ground forces in Vietnam. C, in 1968 after the Tet Offensive, despite the fact that it was a U.S. military victory. D, in 1969 in the wake of the Woodstock Festival. '25. In Tinker v. Des Moines, the Supreme Court ruled that the First Amendment to protect the rights of students to do which of the following? A, register students through the Selective Service Act. B, hold anti-war protest rallies on the grounds of the school. C, burn their school flag as a symbolic protest against the war. D, organize teach-ins at their school in support of anti-war protest. The Congress approves and supports the determination of the President as Commander-in-Chief to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. Tonkin Gulf Resolution, August 7, 1964. Which of the following identifies the significance of this resolution? A, Congress showed its support for a policy of neutrality in Southeast Asia. B, Congress authorized the President to take military action in Southeast Asia. C, Congress provided the President with new constitutional powers to declare war. D, Congress denied the President the revenues he needed to fight the war in Vietnam. Number 27. The ratification of the 26th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was a result of the A, participation of young Americans in the Vietnam War who could not vote. B, fear of McCarthyism and the possible denial of voting rights. C, reaction to the launching of Sputnik by the Soviet Union. D, reporting on the Watergate scandal and government corruption. Number 28. The intent of the War Powers Act of 1973 is to limit the President's power to A, send troops to rescue Americans held captive by terrorists in a foreign nation. B, use troops to defend against an armed attack on the United States. C, send troops to suppress a riot in an American city. D, commit troops to major military operations in a foreign nation.